I'm as nervous as I was the day we started the church, I feel like. Anybody else? No, Ben, we are not. Anybody else feel like it's just like, I have seen it all week, and I'm still just amazed that these guys got it done. Again, they were here till about 2 a.m. last night, and just all that this represents for us. I hope that you, no matter what your faith perspective is this morning, I hope that you can see the hand of God, or at least the effects of God's hand in our community here. There are some special people, and we have a special God, and I would love to invite you, if you're here for the first time especially, to jump in with us. We believe the best is yet to come. So grateful for everything that's happened in our short history, but we believe the best is yet to come, and so jump in and jump on board with what God's doing here and what we believe God will do. Expectations, we all live with them, don't we? Your bosses expect certain things of you. You expect certain things of your bosses. We expect to see the fog often here in San Francisco. We never expect to see snow. We expect certain things from our friends and different kinds of things from our enemies. We expect things of ourselves, and we even have expectations when it comes to God, don't we? And sometimes as we go through life with expectations, oftentimes those expectations are met. I mean, this building, those of you who were looking forward to today, it looks just like you thought it would look, right? Right? No way. So much better than what my expectations were. Sometimes our expectations are met. Sometimes they aren't met. And when our expectations aren't met, sometimes it's a disappointing thing because it just didn't get to the top of where our expectations were. Sometimes it's a glorious thing because it far exceeded our expectations. And every one of us in this room have expectations when it comes to God and how we perceive that God relates to us. And the reason we have expectations for God, or at least what our expectations of God are based on, are these two things, I think. One, what we know to be true about ourselves. And secondly, what we think is true about God. Jesus was a master storyteller. In fact, he told fabulous stories, so many fabulous stories. But I think there's one he told that was absolutely the best one. Just my opinion, but I think it's true. It's a story about expectations. It's a story about the expectations that a young man has. In fact, he has expectations that whatever he's actually been looking for his entire life, he will find far from home. Those expectations go unmet, though. And as he begins to turn around and head back towards home, he has a set of expectations again. And when he gets home, those expectations go unmet as well. And so I would love to perhaps see God blow up our expectations for what we perceive to be true about him and how he relates to us. Maybe, just maybe, today you might leave here with a very different reality than the expectations you had when you walked into this room, especially when it comes to you and how God relates to you. If you have a Bible, we'll be in Luke chapter 15 this morning. If you need one, lift a hand and we'll get one to you. Our Bible passing out team, they've been exercising all week to cover the bigger space, so just raise your hands. This is yours to keep. We believe the scriptures are important here. We want to see a community of people in the city come alive with orienting our lives around Jesus, and we believe so much of that is revealed to us in the scriptures. And so Luke chapter 15, on page 568 in the Bibles that were passed out. And I'd ask you to stand at this time with us. Let's see what I think to be the greatest story Jesus ever told, because it demonstrates, I think, the greatest truth we could ever know. Here's what Jesus said. And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me my share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. Remember, Jesus is telling a story about a Jewish young man who would not eat pigs, but now he's longing to eat. This is a bad day if you're a Jew, right? And all of us Gentiles are thinking, Ben, that's a bad day if you're a Gentile, right? Eating the pig's food. Verse 17. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. You may be seated. Pray that God will use this in your life and in my life. Keep those Bibles open, because I want to show you something in just a moment. This is a beautiful story, isn't it? But you can't get the full beauty of the story without realizing that Jesus is demonstrating more than a story. He is trying to demonstrate reality. But you can't get the full weight of the story unless you and I understand his original audience. To do so, look at verses 1 and 2 of chapter 15. Who was Jesus telling this story to, and what would it have meant to them? In verses 1 and 2 of chapter 15, here is the audience. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to hear him. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. This man receives sinners and eats with them. So the Pharisees and the scribes are there, and the tax collectors and the sinners are there. So when Jesus tells the story, they already have expectations for the kinds of people that are allowed to be near Jesus. And so do you this morning. Every one of us, right? We may think we deserve it, but not certain kinds of people. Or we may think that certain kinds of people deserve to be close to God, but we know our track record. We've seen the movie from our past. We know we aren't in that group, right? So every one of us in this room have expectations about who God is in relationship to who we are, and whether or not that means we can come close to God, or whether we assume that we must stay at a distance. The same was true for these very different groups of people. Pharisees and sinners, very different kinds of people, right? One knows they're a sinner, the other thinks they're not. Two very different kinds of groups with two very different sets of expectations for who would be allowed close to God and who would have to stay at a distance. There was something about Jesus that attracted people to him that we would all think would be the people furthest from him. There was something whimsy, I would say, about Jesus that attracted people to him that you would have assumed would be the kind of people that would have to be furthest away. And the religious leaders, the people who always thought they were the closest to God, Jesus oftentimes seems to indicate that you're really not close at all. Jesus said, you honored me with your lips, but your hearts are what? Far from me. Your hearts are far from me. And so Jesus begins to tell this great story so that the Pharisees, the religious Pharisees, so that the terrible sinners, and so that every one of us this morning might know who is allowed to have a relationship with God, what kind of man is, what kind of woman is, how clean does our record have to be, what is the scorecard, what's the standard. And so Jesus tells the story to demonstrate who's allowed to get in on it. Who's allowed to get in on it? He says that there was a young son who, while his father was still alive, asked his father, can I have your inheritance as though you were dead? In this culture in the first century, what would have happened is the older brother would have gotten 2/3 of everything that belonged to his father. The younger brother would have gotten 1/3. And we don't know how much stuff there was in that 1/3, but we know it must have been a lot, right? Because it says, after a few days, the son was able to set off. Anyone that helped move Epic, you know that if it takes you a few days to move things, what must be true? You've got a... I guess everyone that came to 9:30 were the movers for the week. Listen, if it takes you days till 2 a.m. on Saturday night to get stuff settled in and moved out, you've got a ton of stuff. We know this about the young man. When he asked for his dad's inheritance and the dad said yes, he was ready to go. It is what he had waited for his entire life. So the fact that it takes him a few days must have meant that 1/3 of his dad's property must have been a lot of property. And it says after a few days, he takes off. And when he takes off, he knows one thing is true. I will never see my father again. I will never see my dad again. The father-son relationship is over. I will not see this man again. But he didn't care. Why? Because what he had always longed for, he was sure it was somewhere out there. He was sure that if he could just get to the distant land, he would finally have enough money to buy whatever. Anybody else ever thought that? Really? Is a pastor the only one? No one else ever lies awake in bed and says, if, back in the old days of the sweepstakes, if Ed McMahon knocks on my door tomorrow, everyone around my age or older, we get that. See, kids, there was this guy, and it was a commercial, and Ed McMahon would walk to people's houses. He would hand them huge $10 million checks. And so I would go to bed going, what would I do with it? And so the son has always known what he would do with it if his father gave it to him. And his father gives it to him. And so he goes in a distant land. And it says that he squanders everything that his dad gives him. And he doesn't care that he's never going to see his dad again. He doesn't care in this moment that he's no longer considered a son to his father because he's living as though his dad was dead. He doesn't care. But why? Because he's just like us. He knows that it is out there somewhere. And every one of us in this room, we have spent a majority of our life looking for it, haven't we? You're looking for it. Like, you haven't found it yet in your company, but you know if you get that next promotion, what's going to happen? You're going to get it. Some of you came to San Francisco looking for it. Some of you, and some of these are really good things. Some of you believe once that life partner becomes obvious, that's your it. And we're praying for you. Just remember what the service charge is if we hook you up. Hook up in the best sense, not in the sense that some of you are thinking about. But we're no different than the son. We all have something in our mind that if we could just have it, everything will be satisfying, we will be good, our life will be almost perfect, and so we go after it. And the son goes after it, but he doesn't care that he's lost the relationship with his father because it is somewhere out there. Well, the scriptures say that he goes and he blows it all in reckless living. We can use our imagination, right? Squanders it, wastes it. His older brother, I believe, accuses him of wasting it on prostitutes. He squanders it in reckless living, and he begins to be in a kind of need that he's never known. Think about the irony. He thinks that everything is out there, but while he's been in his father's house, he's never known this kind of need. Now he's way far away where he wanted to be, and he knows need for the first time in his life in this way. Isn't it ironic? Isn't it ironic? He was convinced, just like some of you are convinced. If I get this, if I have her, if they say yes, I'll have everything I ever wanted. Well, he finds himself in a form of need that he's never known. Never known. And let me say this. God has no problem allowing us to lose certain things, especially if it will help us recognize our need for him. Let me say this again. God has no problem taking stuff from you or allowing things to be taken from you, especially if it helps us recognize what our need for him actually is. What seems to be a cruel move by God is oftentimes a gracious gift to us. Let me repeat that. What seems to be a cruel move by God is oftentimes a gracious gift to us. Have you lost anything lately? Job? Relationship, your ability to control outcomes, health, money? Have you lost a sense of your status or significance? Hear this profound question. What if losing what you think you need most allows you to receive what you actually need most? Say it again. What if losing what you think you need most? I must have this, I must have that. What if losing what you think you need most allows you to actually receive what you need most? If the son had found a lot of joy and not lost his money, do you think he's headed home? I know God uses these kind of things in my life, and I'm never praying for him, right? I'm not saying pray to lose stuff. But if it will help you and I recognize what we actually need most, and I think in our heart of hearts actually want most, we just don't know how to express it, God will allow it to happen. And he does for this young man. This man loses everything. The son loses everything. And it says in verse 17, he comes to himself. Your translation may say that on this day he came to his senses. Anybody's translation say that? The light bulb went off. And he's like, wait a minute, I'm longing to eat pig food. Anybody ever been there? I doubt it. He's longing to eat pig food, and he has an aha moment. He says this to himself, wait, my dad's employees are eating better than I am. My dad's employees have more than enough, so I know what I'll do. I'll go back to my father, and I won't pretend I want to be a son. I know I've thrown that away forever, but I'll say to my dad, Dad, can I just fill out a job application? Dad, I'm pretty handy. I'll do something. So he heads back to his father. He heads back to his father, and he begins rehearsing this speech. And it says that while he was still a long way off, that his father sees him, which lets us know that he's been looking for him. Remember, the name of our series is Found with this tagline: what if what we've been searching for our entire lives has actually been seeking to find us? The son had settled in his mind for what could be the best possible scenario. Thankfully, it wasn't in the father's heart to make that happen. It was something beyond his unmet expectation. So he begins to rehearse this thing, and as he's rehearsing, imagine that walk back. Have you ever prepared yourself for a conversation? Like you've just spent hours rehearsing the conversation with a boss or a loved one? Anybody? You just in your heart just starts beating out of your chest, and you're like, oh no, are they going to hate me? We know that he went to a far country, so imagine how many times he gets to rehearse his speech, right? He plays out all the scenarios. Will my dad ignore me? Will he discipline me? Will he make me pay back everything that I've lost? Will he hurt me physically? Will he pretend like he doesn't know me? And so he's headed back with shame and regret and remorse, but hopes no longer to be a son. That's over with. But he hopes that he can become an employee. That's his greatest aspiration at this point. Just for my dad to be my boss. Just to be one of his hired workers, one of his hired servants. And so he begins to rehearse that in his mind. And he comes back, and as he's walking there, the dad sees him. He spots him. He's been looking for him. And it says the father's heart fills or swells with compassion. And he begins to run to his son, and he embraces him, and he kisses his son. We know that fathers in this century, in this culture, didn't run. But the father in this story runs. Like, Ben, why is that detail important? Because Jesus is trying to demonstrate initiative from the heart of God. He's not a clean yourself up and come to me kind of God. And the son, as he walks back, we know that he must have thought he had forfeited everything that he once had. And there are men and women, boys and girls, perhaps in this very room, and you know where you've been. You know how your movie in the past plays, and so you believe that you forfeited all that you could have ever had in terms of purpose, in terms of God's intention for your life, in terms of a relationship with God as your father. Same thing for this son. Same thing for the son, but what happens? Father feels compassion. Verse 21, he begins to give the speech that he's rehearsed. I mean, he's got to be a great public speaker by now, right? He's been rehearsing this from the far country. He's back. And he's giving his father everything that he's rehearsed. Here's what he says. And in my mind, you know when you want to get words out of your mouth really quick before someone slaps you? Anybody have that thought? I think he's trying to talk as fast as he can, right? Like he just wants to get it out there. Dad, I know I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Would you just give me a job? So he starts into it. Father, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. He's absolutely telling the truth. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Does the father argue with him on that account? He's like, no, you're worthy. I know you've been a bad boy, but the Father doesn't talk about his worthiness. What was true for this son is true for all of us as sons and daughters in this room. We are no longer, nor were we ever worthy to be called sons and daughters of the Most High God. So we, like this son, we try to figure out ways to work our way back in. No longer as sons and daughters. We think we forfeited that. We just want to be employees. God, just let us in. God, I will go to church. God, I'll even go to the 9:30 service at church. God, I'll get religion. God, I'll have integrity. God, I won't lose my temper so often. God, I'll try to make amends. I'll get to work early. God, I'll work it off. So as the son begins this whole, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son, just make me one of your employees, the father interrupts him because the father is not interested in simply having some hired workers. He's interested in having sons and daughters. He's interested in having sons and daughters. He's not looking for more people to hire. Will we work for God? Absolutely. That's not where it begins, though. He's looking for sons and daughters. So here's the response from the father. Bring quickly, verse 22, the best robe. Do you know who had the best robe in this house? It's not Uncle Billy, by the way. Who has the best robe in the Father's house? Trick question? The Father. The Father. What is he saying? What is Jesus demonstrating? The Father is going to clothe his son who rebelled against him with his own coat. Don't miss that. Then he doesn't say, bring one of the 10,000 fattened calves. What does he say? Bring thee. Bring the fattened calf. I've been waiting for this moment. It is time to party. We know if you read through the rest of the story, loud music and dancing. Big Brother wasn't thrilled about the loud music and dancing. We're hoping CVS will be. Yes, that's a serious issue we're making light of, but in case you want to know what's above us. We know that there was music and dancing. But why? What's the point? Why a party? The son blew everything. He wasted all of his dad's money. Here's the point, verse 24. Because this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost. Didn't know where he was. He didn't know where he was. But now he is found. Let's party. Let's party. Jesus is demonstrating a great reality about the Father, but if you only had this parable, you wouldn't get the full reality of how this whole thing works. So let me just fill in some missing spaces, some gaps. The reality of that is this. Every one of us are sons and daughters in a very faraway land, doing our own thing, looking for it. And in the reality story, it's not that the Father just waits on the porch for us to come home and then he runs to us. The reality is he sends our elder brother, Jesus, to come find us. Why would Jesus, his one and only son, give up the life he had? Here's one reason. Because God was interested in having many more sons and daughters. So let me ask you a few questions as we close. What kind of far away land are you living in right now in your life? What is the it you think will finally do it for you? Secondly, are there things being taken from you? Could it be that you losing what you think you need most allows you to receive what you actually need most? Every one of us this morning walked in with expectations. Expectations about the existence of God, about whether or not we'd find friendly people here, about what the space would look like. We all walked in with expectations. And I don't know what expectations you walked in with when it came to God and how he might relate to you based on who you are, what you've done, what you think about him, what he thinks about you. I don't know what your expectations were, but my hope is that they've been blown this morning in terms of coming to grips with the heart of God for you, not based on what you've done. We have a value around here at Epic, and it says this: because of the grace of Jesus Christ, our past doesn't have to dictate our future. God initiates a lot of this, but there was one thing that the Son had to initiate. There's one thing that you and I have to initiate. We've got to turn back towards home. The Father couldn't have done all the things we just celebrated if the Son hadn't come home. I don't know where the distant land is for you, but let me just encourage you. It's not so far. Beyond hope, beyond reconciliation. Some of you in this room, I don't know whether you've been to church in a long time, this is your first time, you're here every week. Don't miss the heartbeat of the Father. Would you pray with me?